Guys, meet our new player, Cody. Cody makes a gnome illusionist. We are found by the half-dragon hunting us. Cody takes the MacGuffin and yells, "I wish to abandon my friends and help you!" The baddie destroys our item and teleports away. The party fight Cody's character. Cody becomes very upset in real life that his gnome is being treated in this way. He says he is just acting in character. We reply, "So are we." With Cody's gnome at -10 hit points, we look to the GM. Cody's gnome is no more. "You earned this," he says. With this crazed glare at the GM, a wet-sounding fart erupts, and we have to clear the apartment due to the toxic stench. Cody then moved his car to where he was blocking the rest of us in the GM's driveway and walked home. What the hell am I reading? In each episode of RPG Horror Stories, I go over how to prevent the issues seen in D&D games. However, I don't want to force people to watch through my entire series of RPG horror stories, and this kind of information is really, really important. Problem players are called that for a reason. They are a real problem. A toxic player at your game can absolutely ruin an entire campaign for not just you as the DM or you as the player, but the entire table, DMs and players alike. Knowing how to handle these issues is really important, and often it's really simple. However, simple doesn't necessarily mean easy. So today I'm going to go over tips on how to deal with problem players in D&D campaigns. Starting off, it is always important to talk to the player first. This is always the first step. If you or the party or the DM have identified a problem, like Cody, for example, is rolling really high on all of his dice rolls, he might be cheating, or the DM has filled his campaign with NPCs that are hogging the spotlight, DM NPC style, well, you should probably talk to them first. I don't mean talk about them to other players, I mean talk to them. Hey, DM, are you sure these NPCs are really necessary for the campaign? I feel like they're hogging the spotlight from the party. If the DM responds amicably, then you can have a discussion about how to fix this problem in your campaign. Now, of course, if the DM doesn't respond amicably, or the player doesn't respond amicably, whatever, then it gets more complicated. Here's the gist. If there is a person at your table who cannot take criticism, that is an automatic sign to me of a toxic player and sometimes, most of the times actually, a toxic person. Not being able to take criticism is really bad, especially in Dungeons & Dragons. Things go wrong, bad stuff happens, and I'm not saying DMs and players should beat themselves up over every single issue, but being able to take criticism is really important. It's key to improvement. D&D is a big game. Being able to improve constantly is something you need to do. Having the capacity to take, accept, and learn from criticism is really important, and DMs or players who react to criticism with hostility, well, that is the sign of the worst kind of player, in at least my opinion. Now, it's always helpful to get a group of people on your side. Don't think of it like ganging up on the DM or ganging up on a player, but think of it as building up support for your argument, showing that you're not the only one who thinks this, that other players also believe that this is a problem in the campaign. It really illustrates when multiple people are agreeing on the same issue. It illustrates that this is a real issue, that these DM NPCs or these really high dice rolls or these role-playing habits are not something that is making the game enjoyable for the party. Now again, don't gang up. Don't attack the player or the DM. When you attack someone, no matter how valid your criticism is, if you attack someone, they're always, almost always going to get defensive naturally. No one likes getting attacked. Treat it more like a discussion, not like a lecture, not like a debate. Just treat it like a discussion. Talk to them. Don't talk at them. Don't yell at them, certainly. Talk to them. It is a discussion. You're discussing how to improve your game. Now, usually players and DMs will be amicable to this kind of criticism. When you look at an issue like power gaming, min-maxing, spotlight hogging, those are players who are just really excited. And when you have a discussion with them, then there are a lot of issues that can get resolved by just talking. I find that those kind of problem players are the ones who are most amicable to criticism and most willing to improve their play. Because, again, spotlight hogs, min-maxers, they're people who are just excited. However, there are other problem players that are more likely to become defensive. People like instigators, toxic role players, people who come into this game seemingly just to ruin it. I've covered plenty of RPG horror stories in the past, and there are times where I am absolutely shocked by the behavior of some people, and frankly, while it might seem unbelievable, those kind of people are real, those kind of selfish individuals, especially in online Dungeons & Dragons, because when you're online, you're not sitting at a table together, there is seemingly less consequences. People feel more free to act in selfish ways. So in those cases, you really need to be careful about who you let into your game in the first place. Red flags, people, red flags. Players like this, these sort of toxic, hostile players, will often have red flags. Things like creepy backstory aspects, things like very strange, exaggerated requests for items or traits, things like toxic discussion during pre-game banter. Things like that are red flags. No, let's not pretend like every red flag is easy to spot. There are things that don't show up until the game starts and the first dice hits the table. But problematic behaviors are something that you really want to look out for in your game. Now, don't be paranoid, don't be overanalyzing and psychoanalyzing your players or your DM. Have fun with the game. But if you see something that is seemingly wrong, like a player getting upset at the DM for a ruling, or a player who is being toxic and shutting down other roleplay from other players, or a DM who's filling the campaign with DM NPCs or railroading the party, those kind of behaviors are not something you should just overlook. Think about it and start trying to figure out what you can do to fix the situation, and then go back to step one, which is to talk to the DM or player. Now, we've discussed identifying problem players and talking with problem players and talking about what if they receive your criticism, but what if they don't accept your criticism? What if they get defensive and attack you back? Well, unfortunately, that is the sign, like I said before, of a toxic player, and the real only thing you can do is to not play with them anymore. If they are not going to take steps to improve their play or to make the game more fun for the rest of the party, that is the sign of someone who is selfish and doesn't want or care about the other players at the table. They're there for themselves, and that is it. If they're not going to take criticism to improve the game for the group, then, well, that is not acceptable, especially in a game like Dungeons & Dragons, a collaborative game where everyone, DMs and players, need to put in the effort to make it fun for the group. If it's the DM, unfortunately, I recommend that you leave that campaign. Often, if DMs are not willing to take criticism, that is just a week on week slog. You're joining this campaign with a toxic DM who doesn't want to take criticism. You've presented this criticism to them, which unfortunately means that if they are this sort of toxic person, it's going to create tension in the group. I do recommend that if a DM is acting toxic and won't listen to criticism, you should leave the campaign. And I'm not going to pretend like that's an easy thing to do. It's hard. Finding a D&D game in the first place is hard, but if this is happening, then no D&D is better than bad D&D. If it's a player, I do think kicking out a player is easier than leaving a D&D game. However, still, not easy. It will lead to friction. It is difficult. You are playing a game with people, and you're going to run into people problems. But it is something that if this kind of thing happens, it needs to be done. I want to end off this video by saying that this should not discourage you from playing or DMing in Dungeons & Dragons. These kind of toxic behaviors are not something that should discourage you from playing this amazing game. I talk about social stuff in Dungeons & Dragons a lot, but you don't need to be a social butterfly to play D&D. You have a group, you have a team, you are with a party. Just like how you work together in the game, you can also work together outside of the game to solve any sort of social issues. Don't let these sort of RPG horror stories I tell on this channel ruin Dungeons & Dragons for you, especially if you're a new player or DM. And that is going to wrap it up for today. If you guys enjoyed this episode of Tabletop Tavern Tips, then please do hit that like button. If you want to see more episodes of this series as well as my other content, then please do subscribe to Crispy's Tavern. And finally, if you want to leave your own thoughts, then go down to the comments down below. In essence, like, comment, subscribe. I will see you all next time. Farewell.